So you're thinking about moving to Germany. Exciting! However, Germany is not cheap, and if you come unprepared, you might burn through your savings real fast. Rent, health insurance, groceries. How much do you think you really need to move here to Germany? Having done the move myself, today I'll break down all of the major costs that you need to factor in when thinking about moving to Germany. I myself moved to Munich 2 years ago, so a lot of the figures I say will be more accurate for Munich, which is one of the most expensive cities. So if you're thinking about moving to a smaller city, it might come out cheaper for you. However, with those, I don't have a concrete personal experience, so the figures might differ a bit for those different living scenarios. However, for Munich here, I will also try to give you different estimates of the lower, mid, and higher range of the budgets, and letting you know what it looks like in the different categories, just so you can gauge for yourself roughly how much you really need to save up if you're thinking about moving here. First of all, one of the biggest chunk is the initial costs. This can include the things like the flight there, which if you're traveling within Europe, you can go with some low-cost airlines like Wizz Air, Ryanair, and then you can even score some tickets for maybe 20 euros or so. Most probably it's going to be somewhere between 50 and 150, but if you're adding luggage and other things to that, the cost can rack up really fast. So if you're thinking about moving and bringing luggage with you, also think about a full service airline. Sometimes that is still cheaper than going with a budget airline and paying for luggage up top. This of course will vary in price based on the dates that you fly and the different services you add, but it can be somewhere between 2 and 500 euros when you're traveling within Europe. So number two, which is characteristic for German expats, is to have temporary accommodation. The reason behind this is it's usually very difficult to get long-term accommodation without being in the country first. So a lot of people opt for something temporary so that they have time to search for a longer-term accommodation while they're already in the country, and they can go on viewings as well. So options here can include anything from hostels, hotels, Airbnbs, or fully furnished short-term flats. A budget-friendly option would be a hostel or a shared flat, which can be around 500 to 700 euros in Munich. A mid-range thing would be something like a Airbnb studio or a hotel that can come up to around 1,000 euros per month to 1,500 a month depending on the area. Now the most expensive option is getting a short-term furnished flat, things like Mr. Lodge, for example. This can go up to 2,000, 3,000 even, and the sky is the limit depending on the area that you need. For example, what we ended up renting is 2,400. That included all of the utilities minus internet, and that was actually for a 75 square meter apartment. Now this was really on the higher end, and it was more than what we originally wanted to pay for, but we ended up not finding anything else, and we wanted to also have the option to prolong it in case that we don't find a new apartment. We also wanted to make sure that throughout that time we still feel at home, because in the UK what happened to us is our living situation was really in student dorms, and we have to move in, move out, and that constant moving around and not feeling like we're at home anywhere really put a great mental toll on us. So this time, thankfully, because we could afford it, we opted for this option for the sole reason of helping us feel good in the new country, and also make sure that we have the luxury of extending in case we don't find anything just yet. When you first move in, they usually require you to put down a deposit, which is usually 2 months' rent. They also will require the first month's rent from you, so make sure that you multiply whatever rent they have with 3 and have that all ready to go once you want to move in. Aside from that, health insurance is something you really need to budget for. If you're employed, your employer will automatically enroll you into the statutory health insurance scheme, which takes away some of your salary, namely 14.6. However, half of that is paid by the employer, so only 7.3 gets deducted from your salary. If you're earning above a certain threshold, which is almost 74k in 2025, in those cases you can also opt for private health insurance. With this, the employer still pays half, but the amount you pay doesn't actually depend on your salary, but rather risk factors. So if you can get into it early, it might actually come out cheaper than the statutory health insurance. This was also the case for us, so it would have been more expensive for us to go into the statutory system than to go for private health insurance, because thankfully we don't have any long-term illnesses, we're still very young, and that means that the private insurance is a bit cheaper. Now, I will make a separate video in the future about my experiences in the private health insurance, but this is really a decision that you need to research thoroughly and look at the different sides of it and decide based on that if you have the option to do so. However, if you're self-employed, you must go into the private health insurance because there's no other way. They don't let you into the statutory one. So paying the full amount by yourself in the private health insurance can mean something around 500 to 700 if you're in your 20s and relatively healthy with no big health issues. Just keep in mind that health insurance is compulsory from day one onwards in Germany, so make sure you've got that all organized before you actually come to Germany. Now, the second one in initial costs would be things like setting up your phone, internet, and these miscellaneous things. For example, getting a SIM card can be anywhere between 50 to 100 euros. Otherwise, you also need to set a bit of budget aside for basic home essentials. So when you move, you need new bedding, you need maybe some new clothes even, kitchen supplies, things like that. Set aside a couple €100. On the lower end, probably 100 is enough. On the higher end, you can go up to the sky, obviously, but maybe 500 for these essentials, especially if you live in temporary accommodation. Then you only need to buy a couple of things and not any furniture, nothing big just yet. So overall, these initial costs would probably sum up to between 3,000 and 10,000 overall. What you here really need to also think about is when you're trying to save money in a new country, you don't necessarily know the best places to buy the things yet, so maybe you'll buy it for more expensive than what you would buy after having lived there for 5 years. For us, I remember the starting costs for 2 people were around 11,000, but that is also because our rent was really high. So we paid 2 months of mortgage plus the first month rent, and that was already almost 7.5K. Outside of that, we spent around 2K per person, but that actually included one big purchase, which was a fridge. Because the short-term rental that we went for, the fridge actually was way too small for us, and we knew that wherever we move, we would need a fridge anyway later in the future, so we just decided to buy that a bit earlier because we really felt the need for a proper sized fridge. Moving on to the rolling costs that occur every single month. I already talked about the rent and the utilities. However, in long-term accommodation, the prices are going to be a bit different. So in Munich, for example, in a smaller apartment, if you're sharing with other people, again, it can be between roughly 600 to 900, but if you want your own studio, it would probably be around 1500. Nowadays, for a 1-bedroom flat with a living room, a kitchen, a bathroom, I see a lot of them going for 1800 and even a bit more. Because Munich implemented a rent cap, that means the rent is not going astronomically high, it's still very high. However, what that means is for one single apartment, there are so many people applying that it is very difficult for people to get accommodation. However, once you get it, you also need to pay utilities. For us, that turns out to be roughly 150 to 300 a month, depending on the season, depending on how much we are actually here in the apartment, but that's how much roughly you need to calculate with. Then moving on to groceries, that depends on what you eat, how you eat. Obviously, if you cook at home most of the time, it's going to be cheaper. If you eat out, that's going to be extremely expensive. Here in Munich, the restaurants are really expensive. So I'm going to operate now based on the assumption that most of the meals you're going to make at home. If you start buying things at cheaper places like Aldi, like Lidl, Netto, then you can come out to around 200 to 300 per person per month. And if you want to shop at places that are bio, organic, fancier places like Edeka, Rewe, then it will be a bit more expensive, could be around 350 to 450 a month. I looked at our spending in 2024, and on average, across the 12 months, we actually spent between 500 and 550 on a 2-person household. The way I did this is basically just cooking at home most of the time by meal planning, but I also use a shopping plan to make sure that I maximize the savings on what I buy. Go check out my other video on the Sunday reset to see exactly how I do it, but I might also do a more detailed video in the future on the shopping plan and how I save money while living here in Germany. If we're already talking about food, let's talk about leisure and entertainment. First of all, going a restaurant here in Germany is really expensive. If you want to just eat something very cheap, like a dinner, that would be 10 to 15 euros. However, if you go in a sit-down restaurant and order just a main with a drink, it will come out to be 30 to 40 euros. Going out for drinks is even more expensive. A beer would cost somewhere between 4 and 6 euros, and a cocktail can be 10, 15 euros, or even 20 in more expensive places. So again, if saving money is your goal, then minimizing eating out, going out is really going to have a huge impact here. Otherwise, having a gym membership can be anywhere between 20 to 100 euros a month, depending on the type of gym and the amenities provided. So overall for this category, I would suggest you budget 150 to 300 euros a month. Then you also need transportation. So you can either use public transport, for which you can get the Deutschland ticket. This is basically a pass for all regional transport, so you can use it in the whole of Germany, and it used to cost 49 euros a month. In 2025, they raised the price to 58 euros a month. My husband and I, we actually don't use public transport, but we use a car because we brought our car back from Hungary, and that costs a bit more. However, with the amount of home office we do, and also the fact that we go back and forth between Hungary, I'm not sure that it actually comes out to be that much more expensive. So for us, in our lifestyle, in 2024, we actually spent around 230 euros each month on the car. But that also included 5 trips back and forth from Hungary. We also went on 4 different trips into other cities, for example, to Prague, to Frankfurt. So those are 4 or 5 hours drive away. And then we also went on a lot of day trips in the vicinity, which would be 1 to 2 hours each way. With that said, I don't really go into the office that much, and my husband only goes twice a week, which means overall we don't actually use the car in the everyday life that much. For 2 people, it actually comes out in a way where if we go back and forth to Hungary, the train tickets for 2 people cost just a bit more than the gas we would spend on the car. This is why having a car for us is actually a tiny bit cheaper if you consider all of these costs. However, if you don't have this, then probably getting public transport is the cheaper option, especially because you can also get to other cities if you have more time to just swap between the regional trains. So the overall monthly cost here can be anywhere between 1,500 to 4,000 euros on average, depending on your lifestyle and what you pay for. And then lastly, there are some hidden costs that people don't really mention, but you still have to have the money for. One of the things that I find absolutely bizarre is you actually have to pay a TV per radio tax per household that is almost 20 euros a month, even if you don't own a TV or you don't use a radio. This is something that is unfortunately mandated, so you will need to pay this or share this if you have a shared apartment with other people. The second one is bureaucracy costs. A lot of things can cost just a bit of money, but it's 50 euros here, 100 there, and it really adds up. So make sure to keep roughly 500 euros in these cases to make sure that you have the necessary buffer to go with these unforeseen costs. Lastly, the apartment setup. So when you move into a flat in Germany, a lot of the flats will come completely unfurnished, but not just unfurnished. They won't have lamps, no curtains, and even no kitchen often. I've even heard of cases where there's no flooring, so you need to put down your own flooring. The reason why is apparently Germans like to stay in one place for a very long time, and they like to be able to customize it for themselves. It is also kind of a protection for the landlord, so there's less stuff for the landlord to maintain, because if you provide something, then you're responsible to maintain it. So you really should expect spending a couple of hundred to even a couple of thousand to furnish your apartment. If there are no machines, for example, you need to buy a fridge, a washing machine, that all adds up. If you also need to put a kitchen in, that is incredibly expensive as well. So make sure that you do a bit of research about how much furniture costs. Of course, a lot of things you can actually get secondhand, but then it takes a lot of time for you to collect all those. You also most likely will need a car to be able to transport that if you buy it off someone else. And then my final budgeting advice, always make sure, especially if you're moving to a new country, to have enough savings. Anything can happen. Maybe you move to a new country and God forbid you start your job that is an amazing paying job, but within 2 months in your probation period, you actually get fired. Because of these cases, it is really important to have an emergency fund saved up. I usually aim for 3 to 6 months of all living expenses to be in the bank. Best case scenario, that money just sits there, but in the worst case, it can really help you from having to move back home in those couple of months while searching for a new job. Of course, I know this is a luxury not everyone can afford, but if it's something that you can manage to build up to throughout your preparation journey to move abroad, that would be really amazing. It gives you a lot of sense of peace, and it won't stress you out as much during your probation period, because you know that even if you lose your job, you have enough buffer to wait it out until you get a new job and don't have to move back and forth. So overall, I hope that this really helped you, because moving abroad is really expensive, and I hope this breakdown helps you with being more prepared, knowing roughly how much you need to prepare for the move and how much you want to set aside. So if you found this helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more videos, and let me know in the comments if you have any other questions about moving to Germany. So I'll see you in the next video then. Bye bye!